All right, let's dive into one of the most critical moments of leadership in history. We're going to be talking about a man who truly became an anchor for a community that was just adrift in a storm of grief. His name? Abu Bakr, as-Siddeeq. I want you to just try and imagine the scene for a moment. The light that had guided an entire people, the voice that had completely reshaped a society, suddenly just goes silent. And look, this wasn't just losing a leader. For so many, it honestly felt like the end of the world. So that brings up a massive question, right? What happens when that certainty you've always known is suddenly replaced by total confusion? When your faith is shaken right down to its core? It's this heavy, unanswered question just hanging in the air. Well, that's exactly the crisis that a young, fledgling community faced back in 7th century Arabia. We're talking about the very first Muslims who were thrown into this situation when the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, passed away. Yeah, so we're now in a full-blown community crisis. And you really can't overstate the sorrow of this moment. The grief was just so overwhelming that it created this vacuum of confusion. And it was threatening to undo literally everything that had been built up to that point. And you know, when you look at the source material, it's crystal clear about this. The Prophet's passing plunged people into this state of profound shock. I mean, some were in complete denial, others were just lost, and the very foundations of their belief were trembling. The community was right there, on the brink of collapse. But then, right into the middle of all this chaos, one man steps forward. And he wasn't a king, he wasn't some great conqueror. He was the Prophet's closest companion, his right-hand man from the very, very beginning, Abu Bakr. And you see, Abu Bakr was, well, he was pretty much uniquely suited for this moment. His faith, it's described as having a level of certainty that was just unmatched. He was known for his incredible character, his quiet courage, his deep wisdom, and his immense generosity. I mean, he had been there standing firm from day one. You know, to really get a feel for the character of these early believers, you have to understand the kind of spiritual education they received. There's this prayer from the Quran they would recite, and it just captures that spirit perfectly. It goes, "Our Lord, forgive us and our brothers who preceded us in faith, and put not in our hearts any resentment toward those who have believed. Our Lord, indeed, you are kind and merciful." So that prayer, it really illustrates the absolute core of the Prophet's teachings. He taught his companions to purify their hearts, to get rid of any trace of resentment and to build a community that was based on sincere love for one another, for the sake of Allah. And this was the foundation that Abu Bakr was about to fight to protect. Okay, so this all leads us to the moment where Abu Bakr's character meets this crisis head-on. He stood up in front of all these distraught, confused people, and he delivered a short, incredibly powerful speech, a speech that would absolutely echo through history. He said, "Whoever worshipped Muhammad, then Muhammad is dead. But whoever worshipped Allah, then Allah is ever living and never dies." Just wow, so simple, so direct, and just earth-shatteringly profound, right? With that one statement, he just sliced right through all the grief and reminded everyone of the eternal truth at the very center of their faith. And look, this wasn't just a good speech. The sources actually describe this as the moment that Allah used Abu Bakr to make the entire community steadfast again. He literally re-anchored their faith, moving it away from a person and back to God himself. And his leadership didn't stop there, not by a long shot. In the really delicate political discussions that followed, he navigated all these complex tribal loyalties with just incredible wisdom. He made sure the community stayed united, instead of splintering off into different factions. But, getting the community in their home city of Medina stable, that was only the first challenge, because across the rest of the peninsula, news of the Prophet's death had triggered a massive rebellion, and it threatened to tear the whole new nation apart. So why did this happen? Well, the reasons for this wave of apostasy were pretty varied and complex. For some people, it really was just the sheer shock of the loss. For others, their faith was still kind of new, not that deeply rooted yet. And of course, old tribal rivalries started bubbling back up, and some ambitious leaders saw this as their chance to grab power. So what you had was this really stark contrast. On one hand, you've got absolute chaos. Tribes are breaking away, people are refusing to pay the mandatory charity, the zakah, and some were even abandoning the faith completely. But on the other hand, you had Abu Bakr's absolute unwavering resolve. He made it perfectly clear there would be no leniency, zero compromise on the core principles of the religion.
And it was that firmness, that conviction, that ultimately ensured its survival.
So what is the legacy of this incredible leader? Well, as the very first caliph, that's the successor to the prophet in a political sense, his short time in charge would come to define the very meaning of steadfast leadership.
And here's what's truly remarkable. His era isn't really seen as a new chapter at all, but as a direct continuation of the prophet's mission. He wasn't looking to change things or innovate. His entire focus was just on preserving the spirit and the letter of everything he had been taught.
And really, if you had to pick one word to define him, it's this: steadfastness. It's that quality of being completely, resolutely firm and unwavering, especially when everything around you is just falling apart. That was Abu Bakr.
So at the end of the day, his story is this powerful, timeless example of leadership when it is needed the most. It shows us what it really takes to lead through a crisis. It's not just about charisma. It's about having this deep certainty, this wisdom, and an absolutely unwavering commitment to your principles.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought, a question to reflect on. In our own moments of crises, in our own lives, when we face that kind of turmoil and confusion, where do you think real strength is found? Is it in our ability to compromise and bend? Or is it found in our unwavering conviction?